Construction in a VUCA world, contractors speak out. How has it impacted them? What are they doing about uncertainty, the volatility, the ambiguity and the complexity of projects and their businesses? Moderated by Bill Rudolph, chairman of the Rudolph Libbe Group of companies. The panelists are Bob Nussmeier, vice president of strategic clients with Baker Concrete Construction, Tasha Sherbanuk, executive director of project execution services with Fluor Corporation, and Greg Fox, vice president of lean construction with Miller-Valentine. Thanks for being here. Let's show them our welcome, and we'll turn it over to Bill Rudolph.
All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to the Contractor panel discussion on construction in a VUCA world. We have a very talented and diverse group of panelists with you today that represent very different sectors of the design and construction industry for participating in this dialogue. I think you're going to enjoy hearing about the very innovative way that these individuals and their companies are bringing effective strategies and tactics to deliver successful capital projects to their customers. Greg has already gone ahead and introduced the group. Let me talk a little bit about our process today. Well, we're here to engage in a conversation, and I think that for many of us, our jobs are to engage in effective conversations that are generative and create a different future than what we've experienced in the past. And I think it's often helpful in a effective conversation maybe to set the context of the conversation. By context, I mean kind of like the purpose and the background that's important for us to share. And so when I look at the overriding purpose of this conversation, CURT exists to support the owner community to get the most out of their capital improvement programs, to get the best value for every dollar they invest in their capital programs. And to accomplish this, CURT brings together owners, designers, and contractors, brings them together to discuss the opportunities, the challenges associated with delivering capital projects, and then engage in those conversations to find ways to continuously improve how we deliver on these projects and to learn from each other. And I think as we kind of delve into this dealing with the VUCA world, it's helpful just to remind ourselves of the background. This term, VUCA, really originated at the U.S. Army College, and it was developed there at the end of the Cold War when the Soviet Union fell apart and the military was looking at how we'd just gone from this fairly predictable bipolar world where it was really clear who was on your side and who was not on your side to this very complex multipolar world, and they created the VUCA term and the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity to describe this new world that they had encountered. And then I think in the business community, the use of this term really escalated at the beginning of the pandemic because none of us had ever seen anything like that before. And then as the pandemic kind of ran its course and we saw these rapid ramp-ups, we said, oh my gosh, this is what the military experienced applies very well to the business world. And so this panel discussion, the goals for this panel discussion will be for them to share with you the strategies and tactics that construction firms are utilizing to prepare for and to respond to those challenges, opportunities, and issues we face in the world, much as our friend from Turner's, both to prepare and then also respond. And so each of our panelists will kick off this conversation sharing some of their insights into how their firms are deploying the strategies to ensure that they deliver successful capital expansion projects for their customers. And I think they will demonstrate that they embody the mindset and tools that Jim Ellis described, and velocity and unity and collaboration and agility, and that they actually bring these things to life. And so, Bob, why don't you start us off?
Thank you. I'm going to stand up because I don't know how to talk when I'm sitting. Good to be here with you. I was 10 years ago, enjoyed a 10-year career with Baker Concrete Construction, and then was fortunate enough to get some more training, go to work for a decade at Kiewit. And now I'm back to Baker because I completed my apprenticeship. I want to talk real quick about, in this area of complexity, and chaos that quite often goes on with a selected subcontractor, like Baker Concrete Construction is, and how this can be talked about as a group. Remember, this little chat that we're all going to do very quickly and very shortly is just to motivate you to come up with some thoughts and some questions and ideas, so that our open discussion toward the end of this will be the most productive part of it. A lot of you know Baker Concrete Construction. All I'm going to say, it's a big construction company as a subcontractor, only doing a broad range of concrete construction all over the country. So we were fortunate enough to pick up about $2 billion worth of concrete construction last year in the United States from all of you in the room, and we appreciate that, and hopefully we'll do more soon. What I want to talk about is one of the areas that has hit us recently that turns chaos into the job site because of the lack of an integrated project team with stakeholders working on this issue very, very early. It has to do with concrete, as most of you know, is the widest used building material in the world. The only material that's used more than that is water. It also happens to be, because of the energy consumption that's required to make Portland cement, it is the largest polluter by far. And so carbon reduction, or embedded carbon emission reduction in Portland cement, is a critical item for all your projects to happen, and happen now. It might have been procrastinated by the cement companies for a long, long time, but it's over now. It's heyday. It's time to clean it up. And those emissions that are affecting perhaps climate change have got to be cut in half overnight. So what happens is, a lot of folks say, well, the easiest way to drop the embedded carbon emissions on my job site, let's say your job site's going to use up 25,000 cubic yards of concrete. The quickest way to drop the emissions on your project is to cut the Portland cement dramatically. So when you do that, a lot of things happen. The good thing is, it's true. You can still get quality concrete with less cement. Talk about real quick some of the reasons that concrete is so popular and why this is a great time to be promoting concrete as your primary building materials in certain scopes or certain projects. But look at the variability that exists in concrete. Because it is, and you've all seen it, whether it's in your driveway or on a high specification industrial foundation for a power plant, or maybe it's for a dam, you've seen environments where concrete can vary considerably on how it performs from project to project based upon the producer, the quality of the producer, the quality of the cement and the materials, the quality control, and most importantly, what the concrete contractor is doing with it. So what I'm saying is, quite often is, we will look at a project, let's say it's a chip plant, and there's 1 million cubic yards of concrete on it, and we will build that estimate on what it should cost to construct those structures. And then we'll get awarded the contract if we're fortunate, and Bechtel or Fluor or Hoffman or whoever I'm working for will say 3 weeks before we do our first pour, they'll say, well, by the way, Microsoft, we kind of promised Microsoft that we'd take a big drop in carbon emissions on this project. And we kind of forgot this, sorry, Baker, but we need to use these new mix designs that have a significant amount less Portland cement, which will drop the embedded carbon emissions substantially on that project. And we go, oh, great, we want to help out, we want to do this, we want to do that, but guess what? You're just adding more money to the job, because it may not strip forms the same time, it may not finish the same time, it may not have the same consolidation, or worse, it might not even be proven, that particular mix design, that it has a 50 or 100 year life cycle durability in it as required for that structure. So what am I saying? The crazy stuff is, we need to get involved. That's, the stakeholders need to get involved early with the owner and the checkbook, who's really putting out the money for that structure. when they're a part of that integrated project delivery process early, way before the structural engineer starts designing the mixes, then these kinds of things can happen. And it's not a big deal to dramatically drop the embedded carbon emissions on a project or a building or any of what you're seeing on the slides. It's not a big deal to have a huge impact on how much that is, but it is a big deal if you didn't start talking with the ready mix producer and the structural engineer and the owner and the architect and all the parties or stakeholders in that project. If you didn't start talking about that really, really early in the game, it can really put everybody in congestion and become a very difficult process and sometimes fail. So that's all I got to say real quick, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Fluor.
Thanks, Tasha.
I didn't realize that my new job title, Mrs. Fluor. I'll have to make that work. Probably most of you are familiar with Fluor, and as you know, we execute all kinds of projects. And I've had the opportunity to work on projects of all different sizes and types in my 25-year career. But when I was invited to participate in this panel and be made aware of what the theme was, talking about VUCA, I thought, wow, I need to wind back the clock just a year to the last project that I worked on before I took my current role leading project execution services. So the project that you see here is the LNG Canada project. It is one of the largest energy investments in Canadian history. I am Canadian, so it has made me particularly proud to have the opportunity to work on this project, both in the home office through detailed design and then spending a year in the field leading the technical services team. So when we talk about VUCA, this project ticks a lot of boxes. And I would say VUCA in both the definition that we first started talking about as well as the definition that we started talking about just a day ago. All sorts of complexities and ambiguity and challenges associated with the project, but also tremendous opportunities. So first, a little bit about the scope. So this is a liquefied natural gas project. Its location is in Kitimat, British Columbia. So if you don't know where that is, you might know where Vancouver is. Travel several hundred miles north of there. So quite remote, but on the coast. So some challenges. The weather there is quite rainy. When you drive into town, there's a big snowflake on the city sign that tells you you're going to expect a lot of snow in the winter. And a tremendous amount of rain through the course of the rest of the year. So tremendous challenges, tremendous opportunities, both from a location perspective, but also a scope perspective. So a lot of subcontractors involved, a big scope. We've got 2 natural gas trains designed by our partner, Fluor's partner, JGC, us doing the utilities and offsites. So you can see a joint venture partnership that also introduces a fair number of complexities. A lot of things with the scope, so the site conditions, very challenging. You can think about bringing something in like aggregate or projects to feed the batch plant. One location where that comes from, you're kind of stuck with what that material is. From an owner perspective, also a joint venture amalgamation from that side as well. So different stakeholders, different viewpoints coming into play. You can talk about environmental requirements. So as you might imagine, and you can see in some of the photos here, it's one of the most beautiful project sites that you'll ever have the opportunity to visit. But with that, you've got a lot of wildlife interface. Never want to be going out on a site walk and finding yourself from here to there with a grizzly bear. That's a bad day. Or potentially a wolf. But also you can see that we're very close to the ocean. The amount of hours that were spent salvaging fish or salvaging amphibians in order to meet those obligations, very important. Close to a town site, so designing for some very specific noise requirements, and on and on. So a challenging job. How do you face those challenges? It's really simple and something that we've heard a couple of times. It's all about people. It's all about collaboration. And so with that, I'm going to play a video next. And this video is actually produced by our owner or by our client. And when I requested permission to share this, they were thrilled that we're going to look at it together. So hope you enjoy this short video.
JFJV and LNG Canada, they've worked in a really close collaboration.
It started at the very beginning. It started when we had 5 people on the job and then went to 50 and we grew. learning to speak the same language together. Now, when we're at 3,500 people, 3,400 people, when someone new comes in, they feel that culture and they feel that something is different here.
Honestly, on site, it's one of the best teams I've worked with, be it communicating with other contractors within our own or within the JFJV or within LNG Canada. Everybody's helpful, and you can always lead to a solution by talking to the people in LNG Canada.
By developing these relationships, that's what helps drive the culture so that everybody takes a personal responsibility. Culture is critical to making this the safest project on Earth.
So many things can be avoided with proper communication. And much is the same with this project as well. It's on such a bigger scale. It's really interesting seeing the aerial shots of this whole site grow bigger and bigger every time. It's quite amazing what people can accomplish when you all work together.
This year is going to be the most exciting. It's where the project's really taking shape. We're seeing more and more collaboration between JFJV and LNG Canada, and to be able to meet people in person again and to really have those face-to-face conversations, it makes all the difference.
LNG Canada, JFJV, and the variety of subcontractors, we're all on that same page, all trying to achieve the same outcome at the end. They're taking up the challenge and really keen on making their own mark.
Great. All right. Hi, everybody. What I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes is what I refer to as CapEx leadership. And these are things that, as a general contractor, that we work with our owners and then we work with our trade partners in order to deliver a project with certainty. And we like to start with that a capital asset, right, to work in a VUCA world, we have to understand what the business drivers are for that project. So we do a lot of time in understanding, and we heard over the last couple of days talking about the purpose of the project. And we spend a lot of time building teams and working with the owner. And you heard from the last panel, the people being in the room and understanding what is important to the project and what's going to make that project successful. And the reason that this is important is this helps us accelerate the benefits that the project is being funded and being built to provide. So we accelerate those benefits and we continue to give value to our clients. And the way we look at that is when you look at the optimization of accelerating cash on a project, especially larger projects, you get the benefit of the project going faster, right? And when you do the collaborative contracting, whether you go full lean IPD or just a form of more collaboration, you accelerate the project timeline and then you reduce the overall cost. And the C-suite really cares about this optimized cash flow. And as you are working through that time, through the collaborative process, you're analyzing, identifying, and mitigating the risks as a team. And I think on the last panel, we had some questions about how does an IFOA or lean projects or lean IPD delivery, how does it manage your risk profile? And said simply, it reduces our risk profile because we focus on what are the true risks for the project, how are we going to minimize the impact from that, and then how do we accelerate the cash flow of our clients. And the main thing that I like to talk about and we share with clients and then we share with our trade partners is how important the project delivery system is. And aligning stakeholders is critical, right? Understanding, again, the business purpose, having continuous improvement as a cycle, right? Which is a lean principle, and looking at how do we maximize the value for all of the project partners, not just the GC, not just the owner, not just the trade partner. And through the lean IPD delivery model, you get the team focused on what is going to be best for the project. not for my scope, not just for the owner, but overall for the project. And when we look at the team assembly, you're looking for collaborative partners. You want to create an ecosystem that starts with the values and principles that you want to be part of, right? You define them, you define ground rules, you define conditions of satisfaction, and you choose your partners based on their ability to deliver these concepts, these values, and live by these principles, because that's what guarantees the success of the project. The other thing, let me ask folks in the room, I heard some people talking about contracts, and we've been over that. Who in the room has heard or said yourselves, after I sign that contract, I never want to look at it again? Who has done that? I think there's probably a lot more. But the contract really matters, right, as we're looking through how we're going to deliver the project. It helps identify the risk, right? It helps you mitigate the risk. It incentivizes you to behave in the desired behaviors. And the contracts that properly transfer risk and properly assign and then protect the risks are ones that you can work more effectively in. So these contracts really matter. And we look at ours all the time because we really need to address, you know, the relationships and identify how we're going to work together. Okay? And this contract and writing of them is based on one fundamental belief that owners and all the project partners are seeking the best possible outcome for the project. It has to be based on that. Okay? And there's a lot of different contract types. There's consensus docs, right, which we've heard about here. There's IFOAs. There's riders you can add for incentives. But there's a lot of different ways to get there. But the point is, document what you want and build that into the contract. And then another thing that these contracts and the collaborations really support, and they actually amplify, is the speed of innovation. So an innovation, the last panel talked about, it's not just in using a technology or using the most advanced tool. It's about innovating your mind and innovating your team and working together to figure out methods that are going to deliver the best thing for the project. You innovate scopes of work, you innovate who does the work. Again, we heard the last panel referring to the collaboration across the trades and what that means to a project. So in order to do that and successfully manage the risk and innovate and understand your methods and tools, the project starts with a strategy and approach and making sure that you have a deep understanding of the market. You have to match your project parameters to how you're going to select your partners and the skills that you need, and working to understand what's the labor supply look like. Are you going to design things that are available when you begin your design process versus being a victim of, you know, that roof is not available? So you have to start with that strategy and approach. And then the last piece is the smart application of all the tools. You want to have measures that help the project and motivate the team to perform. You want to have a data-driven model within the project team and using that data to advance the project forward. And then information that's available. One of the most impactful downtimes for a craft worker is not having the information available when they need it. And we want to leverage our innovation to make sure that information is available. And then you always want to have the right tools in the right hands of the right user. Many times we give too much data to folks or not enough information, and you got to make sure it's in the hands of the user at the right time. All right, great. You want that?
Okay, so we've got a handful of questions here to get the conversation flowing. Let's start with you, Tasha. Tasha, you mentioned the importance of collaboration. Can you share some specific examples of where collaboration between you and the client has really paid off?
Yeah, absolutely. Greg mentioned principles, and there's a couple of key principles that were in place on the project. The first is our mandate for safety, and the safety mantra on the project was, we will be the safest project on earth. So you hear that first, and you say, well, how are we possibly going to be that much safer than every other project that's out there that's being executed? And it really wasn't until we were able to come together as a team with the owner and with our subcontractors in place at the site to say, this is our aspiration and we will work together to get there, that we really saw a step change in safety performance. And that was really, really early after site mobilization that we kind of reached that critical point. And any time now when there's a safety conversation, it is all hands on deck. And I'm really pleased to say that the results of that have been outstanding. We have a very active incident and injury-free program, and you really see a culture of care that has come into place on that job site, and that's really because everybody bought in. The other principle that's in place is, what I didn't mention is this project's being executed on a lump sum basis, so a big lump sum by any standard. So it's very easy to say, oh, are you going to come to odds contractually? Are you going to be arguing about who's going to invest what dollars in order to make a certain perhaps execution change successful? The other principle that's in place to help manage that is the concept of PAR, being professional, being aligned, and being respectful. And if everybody can follow those principles through the course of a project and remind each other to follow those principles, you can really work through anything, and you can find new ways to do something. So if I come back to safety for a moment, it's not just about job site safety, but as I mentioned, I spent a tremendous amount of time in the home office on this project. And like any other job, we executed the design reviews at 30, 60, 90. And in those design reviews, we're interested in getting O&M input. We're also interested, of course, in looking at constructability. But the different thing that we did on this project is we had a very purposeful safety and design program. Now, oftentimes in those design reviews, you'll weave that in as you're going through those reviews, but what we did is we set aside a specific day as we went through each one of those design reviews for each one of the areas to focus specifically on safety and design. So having a look at how is that spool that many meters up in the air going to be installed safely, having to have a look at and seeing, are we setting things up so that we can keep people out of the line of fire? And I really think that through that process, we mitigated risks before they even manifested themselves.
Great, thank you. I think I'll continue with you, Tasha, since we're talking about the LNG project. Field productivity is a great example of a complex issue and continues to be a focus in capital projects today. How was productivity addressed in this project?
There's probably a whole litany of things that we could spend the rest of the day talking about, but maybe I'll touch on 2 points. One of the programs that I was directly involved in, as I mentioned my site role, is I had oversight of the advanced work packaging program. But that program didn't start in the field. It really started way back in the home office. And one of the opportunities that we had with this project is a lot of the construction was being completed on a self-perform basis. And the people that are in the field now completing the project are the same people that were with me in the home office helping us plan it. And what that allowed us to do is we were able to stick to our CWAs, we were able to stick to our construction work package list, we didn't introduce changes, and that really helped make ultimately preparing the installation work packages in the field be very successful. And so our goal there, of course, with advanced work packaging is to make sure that those teams in the field have the design and the drawings that they need, but equally as important, having the materials at hand. And so because we had a plan, a path of construction, and a CWP list that we stuck with, that made allocating those materials a whole lot more straightforward to make sure that they were available when that piece of work went to be executed. The other point that I want to touch on here is something that Ben talked about yesterday with a lot of passion, and that's about having a diverse work site in place. So one of my portfolio assignments previously is I've been the global president for our women-mandated employee resources group at Fluor, and we actually established a chapter at site. So our acronym is GROW, Growing Representation and Opportunities for Women. And I will say that that's made a difference at that job site for women, but it's also made a difference in terms of the culture on that job site in terms of being more inclusive. And so an example of that is one of our subs actually set up an evening Let's Talk group at the camp. I think that it's those sorts of changes that make that job site a place where people want to work and can be productive working.
Wow, thank you, thank you. Bob, you discussed the challenges of reducing the carbon emissions in concrete as an example of complexity coming into play in our business environment. Where are you seeing this in play today, and how do you expect it to manifest itself in the future?
Great question. So it's kind of like going from the West Coast to the East Coast toward the center of the country. So the environmentalists and the legislation, the building codes, all the different areas that are affecting a project's carbon footprint, whether that is operational carbon of the structure or embedded carbon of all the building materials that were used to build that structure, are getting legislated with certain things to reduce it. There's a lot of different ways to reduce the embedded carbon footprint, whether it's aluminum, whether it's steel, or whether it's concrete. And we're encouraging wherever possible that as a part of the original time when the projects are initially being conceptualized is the time to get the stakeholders involved and start talking about how can we achieve a reduction of the carbon emissions and the embedded carbon emissions in the building materials. How can we achieve that objective cost effectively and together as an integrated project team that is all on the same board, same motive, same incentive, clarity of objectives, and get it after it earlier than typically waiting until, okay, we've got a mechanical sub and a material supplier and all these folks. Now we're going to make sure that they send in their environmental product declarations, their EPDs for each building product. And if we don't like it, we're going to kick it back and say you need to find something that has a 30% reduction. That's not the way to do it, nor will it be cost effective. So anyway, that's the way.
Well, and I'm just going to kind of follow up then. You discussed the important, in your slide and then just now, about achieving early alignment around mission objectives defined, clear roles and responsibilities, accountability measures. And I think about as Baker, as a trade contractor, what do you think is the process you find most effective that owners deploy to achieve that alignment?
That's good. Number one is the true understanding and execution of IPD or something close to that. And that clarity is with the stakeholders very early of what that means, and that the owner and the architect and the engineer and the material suppliers, key material suppliers, governmental agencies, whoever's important to that environment, are set with some early accountability responsibilities, and it's measured. And so if you think about culture change, you all remember the culture change that happened 20 years ago when we decided that too many people were getting injured on the job site. That was a massive culture change. It took a long time. You'll find the culture change with cleaning up the job site and the building and the emissions and the materials used. It too is a culture with all the people that work for us and all the people that are subordinate members of whatever entity we're working for or whatever company is our owner that's paying the bills. This is happening, and hopefully it'll happen quicker than the safety evolution, which really took almost 30 years when CII started that initiative. This is a culture change. So in your company, with your people, if they're not all on board with this initiative and getting motivated to apply reduction in carbon emissions, that's probably not a good playbook, because you're going to get left behind.
Great, thank you. Greg, question for you. In your overview, you talked about how the successful capital asset projects start with a clear business case from the owner. And I note that that's an interesting parallel to some of the recommendations from the U.S. Army College on how they train leaders to talk about mission intent and key objectives and such. And that strategy used to reduce the ambiguity and uncertainty from the project. A lot of owners don't share the business case with their construction teams. Can you describe how you encourage owners to do this and what benefits you see for both owners and contractors from that process?
Yeah, so we like to talk about a term we call building with purpose. And there's a guy who can more elegantly say this in the audience, Dr. Jorge Venegas. But we don't build buildings, right? The building is a conduit for, making a product that touches a consumer every day. Or the hospital is where we're saving lives, right? It's actually not a hospital. It's a place where doctors and nurses can provide care for your loved ones, right? So we like to bring that up early in the project, right? To make sure that as we select partners, as we select and build our team, that the team members are coming on and understanding that what they're doing is much larger than placing concrete, right? Or putting up steel. That's not what it's about. It's about the team rallying around the business driver or the purpose of that facility. And then the method to do that is build the building.
Gotcha. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. I'll follow up with you, Greg. You spoke about collaborative contracts that value stakeholders, not just between Miller-Valentine and the owners, but also between Miller-Valentine and the trade contractors. Can you explain to us how those contracts work, specifically the trade contractor ones, and why you found them beneficial?
Yeah, so in the first IFOAs and things that we did, we had partners that signed the IFOA that were part of the profit pool. And being the general, right, we had a lot of trade partners we were working with, along with some self-performed labor, and they were not involved in the profit pool or what's called the incentive comp layer. And so what we started to do was identify the trade partners that can most impact the project, right? And when you think about a project, and this is something for a lot of owners to think about, we like to hire the architect and maybe the CM first, right? And they spend about 10% of the job. The 90% of the labor and material and all of that work, we hire them through a competitive, low bid type of process. And we like to bring them to the table, right? And that contract comes to life when they're incentivized along with the rest of the party. It may not be on the exact same level, but it's an incentive to the entire team to drive success on the project.
Got it. Great, thank you.
And then as far as with the owner, right, the way this works is having the right identification of risk and the right identification of the expert that is needed for the project. In our industry, we have a lot of silos, and I hear people talk about breaking down these silos. And what I like to look at is not breaking them down, but connecting them, because the silos are needed. So you have to identify that contractually, right, on the expertise that is needed. And then you want to have a contract that forces and incentivizes folks to connect. And that's what the contracts really come to life with when they're some form of a collaboration.
Great, thank you. Tasha, you mentioned the importance of building positive relationships as a factor that increase team performance and resilience. How can you be intentional about building relationships in the early phase of a project?
I think, building off of what Greg has said is you have to all be interested in the end game or the success of that project. So perhaps a good example, talking about the LNG Canada project once again, is you may have noticed in that video that we've got some very large modules. So because we had that benefit of being on the ocean, some of the largest modules coming into place on that job site are 10,000 tons. So overseas fabrication definitely came into play. And maybe I can talk just a little bit about how we partnered with that fabricator. So you like to think when you're thinking about a module of that size, what are your constraints? Logistics across the ocean. Is there a constraint on heavy haul at site? We had to get under some power lines. That definitely dictated the size. But as we started working intentionally with our module fabricator, we discovered a couple of key things that really influenced us in the design phase to help make them successful during fabrication. And the first thing was talked about earlier today. We eliminated welded connections from our plan. Everything is bolted. That fabricator shared with us that anytime that they have to do grinding and paint touch-up, that's a big challenge for them. The other thing that came up in the conversation that was really interesting that we wouldn't have considered is that as they're building these modules, we've got pancakes that fit into blocks that then fit into the assembled module. Well, the driving force for the size of that pancake is their paint shop. Not something that we would have considered if we had just gone about the design on our own. So those early conversations, trying to make them successful is what makes us successful. And I think that just reinforces the need for that early engagement and being open and honest about capabilities and constraints.
Great, thank you. So a couple questions. Now this one I think maybe each of you can touch on it. Since COVID, mental health issues have come to the forefront of many workplaces. With construction having one of the highest rates of suicide, how are your companies addressing mental health on your sites? Who'd like to go first?
Yeah, I can start. So and you heard some of our team members on the last panel. So the culture of our project teams is measured, and it's measured all the way down to the craft worker, right? There's daily interactions, there's daily huddles, there's celebrations, but the other piece is there's surveys and feedback on the culture of the project. And we ask about our principals. Are you being respected? Are you able to learn something every day? Are you given that chance? Are you able to collaborate across trades? And if the answer is no to that, we have responses, right? But that culture has to be measured a lot like safety is measured, right? A lot like performance is measured. The culture really is the single thread that goes through the entire project. And you have to keep in tune with it to make sure that your team and culture is what you are seeking.
Great, thank you.
So for us, one of the sobering events is to have, out of the 4,000 craft workers, a number of suicides, and one I know. And so, that really hits home. But I think what has helped a lot is education and awareness at the craft level and motivation to take care of your brother or your sister in that way, the emotional, mental health, not the physical, because you remember all the safety was to make sure you didn't cut your finger off. Well, now it's to make sure that you identified someone that's having depression issues and start to get some help. And that education process and awareness process with the craft has probably been the most important thing. But it's a serious issue, and we really have to continue to focus on it. I'm glad that question was asked.
Tasha?
Absolutely, Bob's got it exactly right. I've spent more time in the home office than I have on job sites, and it's interesting as I look at this project. I spent a year out in the field and got a new opportunity. But if we look at the people that are true constructors, they've been out at that job site since they were mobilized, and they will stay to the end. And the people that are more home office types like myself will make it a year or two or maybe a little bit more, and then we're off doing something else in the home office. That just reinforces, being away from family, working in a camp environment is difficult. And it's not just the challenges of the work, it's the challenges of what's going on in your home life during those 14 days that you're at site that really weighs on people. And so we talk about a culture of care for people. We're not used to talking about mental health. I think that's one of maybe the upsides of the pandemic, if we can put it that way, is that people are becoming more comfortable talking about it. And it's not until you can talk about it that you can actually find ways to help people struggling through something that you may not even know that they're challenged with.
Great, thank you. I'm curious to answer this one. Are you experiencing labor issues or material issues, and if so, and what steps are you taking to overcome them? That's a broad and general question. I'm not sure who it was aimed at initially, but
I'd say
what's going on in the labor world, and then we can talk about
the
materials.
material issue that's been a complete nightmare. Thank God it's cooling. So China's back to work. A lot of things are happening. So I really think the supply chain thing is starting to show some significant progress, and hopefully that'll affect pricing and inflation. The labor thing is we're all stuck with it. We have to manage it better than we used to. We have to be more progressive. We have to class it up a little bit, make it kind of cool to be in construction, and put in some really fancy game rooms on the job site during their breaks, and do all kinds of cool stuff. Intel's building a big job in Ohio, and they've put together a progressive break rooms for all the folks that are eventually going to be out on that site, because they're aware of the fact that there's just going to be this mass competition for the good quality labor craft that are in the Midwest, and they better do that. The truth is, we should be doing that, period, to solve this problem. It's significant, and we got to keep trying to class it up. The fact that the wages are going up isn't also bad when it comes to craft, because a lot of that is driving some of the folks to come back into apprenticeship programs and start learning a craft. So anyway, it's a major challenge.
Maybe if I just build on your comment on materials a little bit. Pricing is, of course, something that we pay a lot of attention to, but really what we need to be focused on these days is lead times. Bulk materials oftentimes will drive our projects, and the last thing that you want to be hung up with as you're getting towards mechanical completion is a handful of 2-inch valves that you don't have, because the lead time went from something that used to be off the shelf to something that's 6 months. And so I think that this really behooves us to now to also be challenging our execution strategies, and lead time has to be a critical element of the risk identification that the process that we go through as we look to what that execution strategy needs to be to make that project a success.
So for material, we take the approach of let's design what we can confirm will be available. That went on a lot during COVID, and actually it taught us a lot about what I refer to as fit for purpose, materials, engineering, information. And when you have that approach about what can I go get, it's a little less worrisome. You're not tossing a list of materials out for pricing. You're confirming what's available. And on the talent side, because it's more than just skilled labor right now, it's all talent. And what we're doing is a lot like I shared in the presentation around, we assemble our teams based on capacity and availability, and we work to get commitments early prior to hiring or putting them on the team. That doesn't solve all of the shortages, right? But it gives you a starting point that you can plan for what may be coming, and you identify your risk, you identify your constraints, and then you have to go understand the market where you're going. If you're going to build a project in Ohio right now, you better be doing some type of labor study, right? Because Intel will have most of the people, and the Cleveland Clinic, and there's like 7 over $1 billion projects in Ohio right now. So you have to go in with a smart approach of understanding what are you dealing with versus just being victimized by there's no labor.
Yeah.
because we've not had a labor shortage on our projects. Material we have. Worst thing was screws for a roof. We couldn't get the right screws. And we couldn't substitute them because the warranty wouldn't hold. So.
You mentioned the worker shortage in Michigan, and I'll just point out that Kevin Hilton wanted to know what was the score to the Ohio State-Michigan football game. And I will just mention that I don't remember the score. I do remember the pain, but I do imagine that because Ohio is such a much more productive state, there'll be a lot of people from Michigan coming down to work those projects.
That's good.
Thank you, Kevin Hilton. I like X that one off. Curious if there's any of you are using technology on your projects to provide real-time data around safety, quality, productivity, progress reporting that you think would be worthy to share with this audience.
Well, we talked about dropping the carbon footprint, the embedded carbon footprint in concrete. One of the reasons concrete mixes are over-designed is because you got to hit a certain strength where it's okay to strip the form and go up a floor, right? And predominantly the measure of determining that is the concrete cylinder. So the maturity meters, the digitized meters that end up being dropped in the concrete as you place it, give you a great statistical data analysis of what's really going on inside that concrete on strength gaining. And with that, then you're allowed sometimes to realize that we've got 50, 75 pounds of extra Portland cement that we really don't need, and we can achieve our strengths much earlier by knowing really what's going on inside that. And that's a digital maturity meter, which are great tools.
Great, thank you. Other technology solutions you'd like to share?
Well, Fluor, like many companies, are on a digital journey. We've invested quite a bit of effort in data standardization, but I think one of the easy wins that comes associated with that is dynamic dashboards. So we have a tool that can integrate information from various data sources, and as we all know, there's plenty of data out there. It's really about how that data gets presented and analyzed that makes it powerful. And so using dynamic dashboards, not just for management reviews, although that's important, but also providing dashboards to the individual who's doing the work so that they can see the trends, so that they can see when information is available and when it's not, is a very powerful tool. And as we continue to build out our journey, one of the things that we're working on is keeping the estimate live. So we've been really focused on how do we first generate a credible estimate. And if we look at estimating at its basics, it's quantities times material cost, quantities times installation rates. So quantities continues to come up there. Our new processes are really about making sure that the quantities are managed through the course of design so that we can have a credible baseline for moving forward. But then also with that, how do we continue to keep that baseline updated throughout the course of execution so that everybody's got ownership of that estimate and is working to make sure that we can deliver to those costs as well, that we can deliver to the schedules that have been put forward.
So, yeah, Bill, there's a lot of technology, right? It's everywhere. So we don't usually address as a whole platform, or we have some things that we're using, right? Procore and TouchPlan. But the thing that we have found that really works well for technology, especially on a lean IPD project, is the team sits down and says, what's going to be our architecture? And they decide what they're going to use, and they define what is good for them, what's going to help them do their job. Because many times we have technology for technology, and the people using it, right? I mean, I still deal with people every day that can't figure out how to do something in a spreadsheet, right? And they've been around for almost 40 years now, I don't know. But the technology platform and how you're going to apply it should be a team's decision to the benefits that it's going to provide to the project. There's way too many to choose and lock in and just go, because tomorrow it'll be old. So the teams do that, and they decide what's going to be useful for them, and then they track their measures and set it up that way.
Great. Thank
And then they own it, right? It's our technology program. It's not something that was forced on them. So
Great, thank you. Since I'm the moderator, I get to pick the question. So here's one I really like. How do each of your companies transfer best practices used on your projects to other locations?
Training, training, and training. So those folks, as they move around, have had consistent training with credibility, trust, and validation that they understand and are doing the best practice. I've also seen a huge benefit in that respect is the ability to integrate the display of best practices by a craft through compensation. And that's made a difference too, where we've motivated adherence to best practices by the craft.
Okay.
Things go wrong on projects, and too many times when we've gone and done our root cause analysis, the end result is because somebody didn't follow a practice. Maybe traditionally our business groups have operated a little bit independently from one another, but we're going through an effort now to make sure that our practices are adoptable by every business line, business group uses terminology that's familiar to them so that they can follow those base requirements in delivering their work. Of course, we also have a formal project experiences program. I think everybody does. But as a piece of that, something that we've found has some of the most bang for the buck is having what we would call a peer assist session. So actually getting a former project team together that has maybe something similar or a similar aspect or aspects to a project that's now going to be executed to actually just sit down and share experiences. And we're so much better at doing things virtually now, we have the ability to do that across the globe.
Great.
yeah, we have similar learn from experience events, but the transfer of those knowledge from person to person is complicated. So we're not, admittedly, not that great at it, right? Because the experience that one learns is they remember that well, but how you transfer that position or that memory to the rest of your company, especially with the personalities and things in our industry, it's very hard, right? So it's a struggle, but we have a lot of events and tools that we try to use. But I am not happy to say we experience similar things on projects. The best way is the model that the panel talked about last time, the same people, right?
Sure.
And that's what we try to do as well. When we build project teams, if you introduce too many new parties or partners to a project, that's a point of knowledge transfer that may be lost, right? So we try to minimize that even on internal teams moving on. But then you've got to also look at the diversity of the teams and your learning plan for everybody. But it's complex, and I don't have we've not found the silver bullet, Bill.
Well, I'd like to say that people are complex.
Right.
In our VUCA world, people are part of the complexity. And I like to, I'm reminded that people will tolerate my opinion. They will act on their own. So I will leave you with that. Let's give our panel a hand. Thank you very much.